Joe Burrus, known to fans as the Amazing Joe, he wasn't just your average magician. The man was a thrill seeker, a daredevil who craved danger as much as he craved applause. Well, on one Halloween night in 1990, he set out to perform the most perilous feat of his life, a stunt that was so extreme, it aimed to outdo even the legendary Harry Houdini.
Known to millions of theater-goers the world over for his amazing and spectacular feats of magic and physical skill, Harry Houdini, famous star, is pictured here as he adds another chapter to his accomplishments of daring.
Wanted to get a reputation like Houdini.
He thought Houdini was one of the great escape artists, and he wanted to be better than Houdini.
See, Houdini had once attempted to escape from a grave, buried alive beneath 6 feet of dirt. He never succeeded at it, but Joe saw Houdini's failure, not as a warning, but as a challenge. He didn't just want to replicate Houdini's buried alive escape. The man wanted to exceed it. Joe had planned to be shackled, sealed in a coffin, buried beneath a mountain of dirt, and then on top of that, have 7 tons of cement poured all over him. Like, he's crazy. I mean, if he pulled it off, it would be a groundbreaking moment in magic history. But if he didn't, well, no one at the time wanted to entertain that possibility.
Wanted to get a reputation like Houdini.
He thought Houdini was one of the great escape artists, and he wanted to be better than Houdini.
And he did the buried alive effect.
Through the chains, through the shackles, through the handcuffs. I burrowed my way through 3.5 feet.
The stage was set not in Las Vegas or on a high-profile TV special, but at Blackbeard's Family Fun Center, a modest amusement park in Fresno, California. It was a local Halloween event with a modest crowd and a single camera crew. But for Joe, it was the stage of a lifetime.
Of dirt. You get through all this before the cement hardens.
You don't get under wet cement, try to get out.
The idea was to be out of the coffin while they were pouring the cement so that he could burrow up through.
You realize that cement starts to harden first at the lower elevation, so it's going to be hard.
But when it sank,
a grave was dug right in front of the audience. Joe stood beside a transparent acrylic coffin, giving the crowd a clear view of the escape to come. He wanted everyone to see. He wanted the struggle to be visible. He wanted witnesses to his triumph or his defeat. Now, wrapped in heavy chains, Joe appeared fearless. Cement trucks stood by. A pit had been prepared as well. And a lot of the crew members, they were whispering doubts like, was the coffin really built to withstand that much weight? But Joe dismissed the concerns. He had done escape acts before, and although this one was more extreme than anything he had attempted, he trusted in his training and in his planning for this event. This was supposed to be the stunt that immortalized him. So Joe waved to the crowd, lowered himself into the coffin, and signaled that he was ready. And after the lid was sealed, the first shovels of earth began to hit the top. The camera zoomed in with the audience leaning forward. And from the outside, everything appeared smooth. The dirt was pouring steadily, and the cement began to flow. The show seemed to be reaching its dramatic peak, but the trick's success hinged on one critical factor: the strength of the coffin. It had to hold out just long enough for Joe to escape, But it didn't. The moment the last of the cement was added, the unthinkable happened. The coffin gave way.
You realize that cement starts to harden first at the lower elevation, so it's going to be hard.
But when it sank, I just knew we're in trouble.
As soon as I saw there was something wrong with the guy, had
That's 7 tons of concrete, 14,000 pounds, and it crushed the coffin instantly. The acrylic shattered, collapsing inward with a horrifying crack. Joe stood no chance. The weight bore down with merciless force, and yet no one in the audience screamed. Not at first. They thought it was part of the act. The silence, the delay, it all felt theatrical to them. But as seconds dragged on and no movement came, that's when the truth hit. This wasn't magic. This wasn't a part of the show. Joe Burrus had just died in front of them all.
the guards there call paramedics and ambulance. And I was kind of directing them out and covered with the dirt out of there.
Everybody just, after about 30 seconds or so, just dove in there. The backhoe was digging a hole adjacent. And just panic. I mean, everybody was weeping and how this happened, and friends, kids and everything,
I never expected that I would have been here.
One of Joe's crew members broke from the sidelines, sprinting toward the cement-covered grave. That single action shattered the illusion, and panic swept through the entire crowd. Everyone scrambled, grabbing shovels, clawing at the heavy dirt and concrete, in a desperate attempt to reach him. The cameras continued to capture every horrifying moment, but it was already far too late. All that weight of the cement had crushed the coffin instantly. Joe never had a chance to even begin his escape. There was no air pocket to breathe in, no space to maneuver, no time to free himself. Unlike Houdini, who had narrowly escaped his incident, Joe had been encased in a tomb of cement. And by the time rescuers reached him, he was completely still, lifeless. The cameras finally cut away, but the damage had already been done. What began as a daring Halloween stunt, a moment that was meant to etch Joe Burrus' name into the history book, ended up becoming one of the most tragic accidents ever witnessed live. A fatal miscalculation on Joe's part that led to his death.
Locks caved in, we got him uncovered, I administered CPR to him until the paramedics arrived.
So he failed, he died.
It's closing all of a sudden.
And sharing this with us.
San Diego, California.
The tank chase, as it's been called, that's probably one of the, if not the most dramatic events that have ever occurred that involved the San Diego Police Department.
Imagine waking up one morning, turning on the news, and seeing a 60-ton military tank barreling through city streets, crushing cars and flattening lampposts as if them shits were toys.
We saw a tank running over anything it felt like running over in the street. And we discussed what to do, and we decided that the only thing we could do is broadcast where it was going so everybody could keep a safe distance from it.
It looked like a scene straight out of a war film, but this was no movie. It was horrifyingly real. Behind the controls was Shawn Nelson, a deeply troubled veteran with nothing left to lose. See, Shawn Nelson wasn't always on a collision course with destruction. Born in 1959 in San Diego, California, he grew up in a fairly typical life, but apparently there was always a spark of restlessness about him. In the late 1970s, he joined the U.S. Army, where he learned to operate heavy machinery, including tanks. After 2 years of service, he was discharged, and what followed was a slow descent into chaos. At first, Nelson appeared to have landed on his feet. He became a plumber, started his own business, and even got married. But then his world began to fall apart. His marriage ended, his business collapsed, and a motorcycle crash left him in constant pain. He blamed the doctors and even attempted to sue the hospital, convinced that they had wronged him somehow. Friends and neighbors, they began to see signs of a man unraveling. Nelson had developed a taste for danger, often taking reckless risks. He reportedly sped dangerously through traffic on his motorcycle and once dug a 15-foot deep hole in his backyard, telling people he was searching for gold. His behavior grew more erratic and unpredictable, and those around him could sense something was terribly wrong. But by May 1995, Nelson was at his breaking point. His finances had dried up, his health was declining, and he was spiraling into paranoia. He told several people he was planning to do something big. Most assumed he was just venting frustration. But on the night of May 17th, he acted on his plan. That evening, Nelson drove to the National Guard Armory in San Diego. And despite this shit being a secure military facility, it was shockingly unguarded that night. The tanks were locked, but not securely enough. And I guess drawing on his army training, Nelson managed to get inside an M60 Patton tank, a massive Cold War era behemoth. For anyone else, starting a vehicle like this would be kind of impossible, but Nelson, in his prior training in tanks, he knew exactly what he was doing. With the tank's engine roaring to life, a new problem arose. The vehicles were parked closely together, making escape nearly impossible. But Nelson, of course, didn't hesitate. He simply bulldozed his way out of it, plowing through fences and barriers. And moments later, a fully armed tank was rolling down the streets of San Diego under civilian control.
So we were taking video pictures of the carnage it was creating on the ground.
Abel, what we need to do is have officers, to the best of their ability and their safety, keep these cars away from them. There's cars that are following them.
A suspect who was under the influence of alcohol and had a drug abuse history stole a National Guard Armory tank, a 70-ton tank. It was unarmed, but the suspect had prior military experience and knew how to drive the tank. When he stole it, he just began to drive down residential streets.
Get your loudspeaker on, please.
It didn't take long at all for 911 calls to pour in. At first, the report seemed a bit too absurd to believe. A man had stolen a tank. But soon, the reality of this shit became impossible to deny. Drivers were calling in panic. Something huge and unstoppable was destroying everything in its path. And the police were completely unprepared for this. There was no playbook for stopping a tank. Squad cars were powerless, and officers lacked the weaponry to penetrate its thick armor. And meanwhile, news helicopters took to the skies, capturing the scene from above. At the controls was Nelson, calm, focused, and frighteningly determined, man. He wasn't running. He was planning on unleashing chaos.
He drove over fire hydrants, park benches, street lights. He attempted to drive over citizens in their vehicles, police cars. It was such an incredible hazard to people in the street. It's beyond words.
Nelson steered the tank through neighborhoods, tearing up roads, leveling street signs, and crushing anything in his way. Some drivers narrowly escaped, swerving out the path. One man jumped from his car just seconds before it was obliterated. Another reversed at full fucking speed, barely staying ahead of the tank closing in behind him. I couldn't even imagine. The police, they had only one option, which was to wait for Nelson to make a mistake.
People on the ground kept debating on how to stop this tank. None of us had the slightest idea what we were going to do.
For nearly 30 minutes, he tore through the city, leaving a trail of destruction worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then, finally, that mistake they were waiting for, it came. As Nelson tried to cross a highway median, one of the tank's treads slipped. The vehicle tilted and became stuck, half on the road and half on a concrete barrier. He tried to power out of there, revving the engine, but the tank wasn't moving at all. For the first time in a half an hour, Nelson was finally vulnerable.
When it made the turn to go across the freeway, the only thing I could think to say, I didn't recall at the time, but when we played the tape back, I said, oh my God, because had he crossed into the opposing traffic, it was rush hour traffic and we would have had a catastrophe. Somehow, he got hung up on the center island. The tank got stuck, and it became immediately apparent that this guy knew what he was doing, and he started backing the tank back and forth.
Officers sprang into action, climbing onto the vehicle. The hatch was locked from the inside, but they weren't about to wait for that. With bolt cutters, they pried it open, and with weapons drawn, they opened the hatch and confronted Nelson. There was no surrender, no words exchanged. Fearing what he might do next, an officer just fired, and the shot struck Nelson in the shoulder, and he collapsed inside the tank. And apparently this was enough to kill him. He was pulled from the machine, lifeless and limp, as the world watched in real time. The streets were in ruins, but miraculously, no lives had been lost. I want to know, why were there no guards on duty? How could something like a tank be left unguarded like that? But this could have turned out a lot worse if Nelson had chosen to target people instead of infrastructure. This event remains one of the most bizarre and terrifying acts ever captured on live TV.
And when they realized he was going to get loose, they had to shoot him.
The whole project will collapse.
Morning of March 20th, 1995, Japanese news stations began airing live coverage of a disturbing situation unfolding within Tokyo's subway system.
It was rush hour when the sarin gas began to spread through Japan's subway system, released from plastic bags onto 5 crowded trains.
See, at first, viewers believed it was a typical emergency, perhaps a fire or a mechanical failure. But it quickly became clear that something far more terrifying was happening. Authorities confirmed there was a coordinated sarin gas attack, a highly lethal nerve agent that causes paralysis and suffocation. And that shit was released in a subway station? Unknown to the public at the moment, Japan was in the grip of its deadliest terror attack to date, carried out by a doomsday cult, unlike anything the country had ever encountered. Aum Shinrikyo, was a Japanese doomsday cult founded in 1987 by Shoko Asahara, a partially blind man who claimed to be the second coming of Christ and the first enlightened being since Buddha. During the 1980s, Asahara became increasingly obsessed with apocalyptic visions, believing he was receiving divine messages warning of the end times. These beliefs led him to establish Aum Shinrikyo, which means religion of the supreme truth.
13 people were killed and some 6,000 others made violently ill in the attack, deemed the worst act of domestic terrorism in Japan's modern history.
And at the heart of these teachings was a disturbing prophecy. He believed the United States would attack Japan, sparking World War III, and culminating in a nuclear apocalypse that would destroy most of humanity. He taught that only he and his followers were chosen to survive this devastation, and his followers took his words as gospel. Many viewed him as a true messiah, with some so devoted to this man that they handed over thousands of dollars to drink his blood, convinced it held mystical supernatural powers. Oh nah. Within just a few years, Shoko Asahara had gained thousands of devoted followers, many of whom dedicated their entire lives to him and his apocalyptic teachings. In 1990, he attempted to make his influence official by entering the political arena, fielding 25 cult members as candidates in Japanese elections under the banner of the Truth Party, Shinrikyo. Confident in his growing popularity, Asahara fully expected a sweeping victory, but instead the campaign was a humiliating failure. His candidates received almost no votes. Enraged by the rejection, he refused to believe the public had simply dismissed his ideology, and instead, he developed a paranoid belief that powerful groups, including Freemasons and Jews, had conspired to sabotage the election. This crushing political defeat had pushed Asahara into further extremism. Convinced that democratic means had failed, he turned his anger toward the Japanese government and the society at large, deciding that violence was now his path forward. Determined to seize power through violence, Asahara launched a plan to establish remote compounds where his cult could secretly develop biological and chemical weapons, and among them, the deadly nerve agent sarin. This marked a dark turning point for Shinrikyo, transforming it into a fringe religious sect, into a full-fledged terrorist organization. And at the time, the group remained largely under the radar, unknown to most of the Japanese public. But that would soon change. On the morning of March 20th, 1995, during peak rush hour, 5 Shinrikyo members boarded separate subway trains bound for central Tokyo, and each of them carried a plastic bag filled with liquid sarin concealed in a newspaper. And at nearly the exact same moment, they dropped the bags onto the train floors and punctured them using sharpened umbrella tips before fleeing the scene. Now, because of sarin's highly volatile properties, the liquid quickly vaporized, releasing an invisible, odorless cloud of poison that had spread rapidly through the crowded subway tunnels. And I couldn't even imagine. And within moments, chaos erupted as passengers began to choke, collapse, and convulse, unaware that they were in the midst of one of Japan's deadliest terror attacks.
Devotees included doctors and engineers who produced the chemical weapons used to carry out the group's crimes. While Asahara built himself on charisma, he spoke little during his trial, muttering incoherently without ever explaining his motivation. He was sentenced to death in 2004, along with 12 followers. Asahara's cult eventually disowned him and disbanded, but Japanese authorities say splinter groups remain active, with some 1,600 members.
The coordinated sarin gas attack ultimately left 14 people dead and injured more than 1,000 others. In the aftermath, authorities immediately turned their attention to Aum Shinrikyo. Prior warnings from former cult members about the group's interests in chemical and biological weapons had been largely ignored up until now. In the days that followed, Police launched a series of massive raids on the cult's compound near the base of Mount Fuji, and what they uncovered was beyond anything they had anticipated. Stockpiles of explosives, chemical weapons, and even a Russian military helicopter, which really makes you wonder where the hell they got that from. Most alarming were the biological agents, live anthrax samples, and even Ebola cultures. Proof that the group had ambitions far deadlier than what they had already done. The full scale of the threat became clear when investigators discovered enough raw materials to manufacture sarin gas on a massive scale, enough to kill up to 4 million people. Japan was left stunned by how close it had come to an unimaginable catastrophe. Dozens of Shinrikyo members were arrested in the weeks following the subway attack, many of whom confessed not only to the Tokyo assault, but also to the cult's broader ambitions. During the investigation, police confirmed what had already been suspected. Aum was also behind a previous sarin gas attack in 1994 in the city of Matsumoto. While rumors had circulated for months, this is the first time they could officially link the cult to that deadly incident.
2 months later, Japanese authorities arrested Shizuo Matsumoto, a man better known as Shoko Asahara, the leader of the so-called doomsday cult Aum Shinrikyo, meaning supreme truth. The self-proclaimed guru, who was nearly blind, founded his cult in the mid-1980s. Asahara predicted that Armageddon would occur in the 1990s and told his followers that they would create a new world. By the time of the Tokyo subway attack in 1995, the cult had 10,000 followers in Japan and some 30,000 in Russia. Devotees.
The group's leader, Shoko Asahara, he remained on the run until May 16, 1995, when police finally located the man hiding in a concealed chamber inside one of the cult's fortified compounds. Though Asahara never admitted to leading Aum Shinrikyo or orchestrating these attacks, the overwhelming body of evidence, combined with detailed confessions from his followers, that shit left little room for doubt. And they eventually uncovered his disturbing master plan too, a campaign of mass terror designed to destabilize Japan, overthrow the government, and ultimately install himself as Emperor of Japan. He was officially charged as the mastermind behind the Tokyo subway and Matsumoto sarin gas attacks, along with other murders linked to his cult. And after a long and highly publicized trial, he was sentenced to death in February 2004. And more than a decade later, on July 6, 2018, Asahara was executed by hanging, along with several senior members of Aum Shinrikyo. On Saturday, May 11th, 1985, a football match kicked off in Bradford, West Yorkshire, England. The game was between the visiting Lincoln City and the home team, Bradford City. Spirits were high. Bradford City had just secured the divisional championship the week prior, and this season finale was meant to be a celebratory close to a triumphant run. Fans filled the stadium to witness what was supposed to be a joyful farewell to an unforgettable season, but it wasn't just a season that was coming to an end. See, at the time, Bradford City played the Valley Parade Stadium, a venue that had long been criticized for its outdated and poorly maintained facilities.
They came to celebrate the club's promotion to the second division for the first time in 50 years, and now they're running for their lives.
It was supposed to be a day of celebration, but turned into one of absolute horror. 40 years ago this week, a fire tore through Bradford City Stadium on the final day of the season, killing 56 fans.
The stands were covered with old, weather-beaten wooden awnings, and beneath the bleachers were piles of rubbish. Shit was falling apart. The stadium was in such disrepair that city officials had already scheduled a complete rebuild, with demolition set to begin shortly after this final game, but fate had a much more tragic timeline in mind. See, during the match, a spectator lit a cigarette, taking one last pull before casually flicking it away. and his attention was locked on the game, but he failed to notice that the cigarette had slipped between the floorboards of the wooden stand and fell into the garbage that was littered underneath the bleachers. And within moments, a small fire ignited and captured live on commentary by broadcaster John Helm. Now, despite the cigarette being dropped only moments earlier, flames were already visible from the stands. Just to show how vulnerable this stadium truly was, the structure was a disaster waiting to happen. All the trash that had accumulated over the season served as ideal fuel for the fire. And it didn't stop there. One of the key reasons for the stadium's planned demolition was the dangerously outdated construction, including the awnings above the spectators, which were made entirely of dry, rotting wood. Add to that a gusty wind sweeping through the area, and you had the perfect storm. Heaps of flammable material, a wooden structure, and a spark. And within just 3 minutes, the small flame had exploded into a raging inferno. Completely engulfing the stands in a wall of fire. The footage captured that day is deeply unsettling, so graphic that much of it remains too disturbing to show on YouTube. However, a live radio broadcast aired during the incident preserved the raw, chaotic atmosphere in real time. Roughly 6,000 people filled the stands that day, and early footage showed many of them sprinting onto the pitch, escaping the flames with seconds to spare. And for a moment it seemed as though the disaster might end without major loss of life, but not everyone ran toward the field. Some fans turned in the opposite direction, heading for an exit located directly behind the stands, right where the fire had started. And when they reached it, they realized the gates were locked. Those that had been forced open led only to slow-moving turnstiles, many of which were either jammed or completely sealed shut. As the fire closed in, people pushed desperately to escape, but the narrow passages and blocked exits turned into a death trap. It was a nightmare unfolding in real time with no way out for those caught in the chaos. And when the smoke finally cleared and the full extent of the horror was revealed, we found out 56 lives had been tragically lost, and another 265 people suffered serious injuries. In the aftermath, sweeping new regulations, safety regulations, were introduced for stadiums across the country. Valley Parade's long ignored structural flaws had come to a devastating end, and on what was supposed to be a day of celebration.
This is Reverend Adelir Antônio de Carli, just moments before he set out on an ambitious journey to fly 465 miles using small helium-filled party balloons. The Brazilian priest was looking to break the record for most hours flying balloons.
A priest in Brazil has come up with a novel way to raise money for a roadside chapel meant to provide spiritual assistance to truckers, trying to break a flight time record using 1,000 helium party balloons. According to news reports, the enterprising Father Adelir de Carli has gone missing off the southern coast of Brazil. The 41-year-old priest, who is an experienced skydiver, was equipped with a parachute, a thermal suit, a satellite phone, and a GPS device. He lifted off from the port city of Paranagua on Sunday. The priest's craft also had a buoy.
The world of television has never shied away from showcasing jaw-dropping, death-defying stunts. Since the earliest days of broadcasting, audiences have been fascinated by individuals willing to risk everything for the sake of a spectacle, for the sake of fame and glory. Something that we can all respect, honestly. While most of these daring feats are carried out by seasoned professionals, one of the strangest and ultimately most tragic stunts was attempted by a man with almost no formal training at all, Adelir Antônio de Carli. Born in Pelotas, Brazil, Adelir felt a profound calling early in life. A calling to serve God. This led him to become a Catholic priest, where he built a deep and genuine bond with his local community. To those who knew him, Adelir was more than just a religious figure. He was a man of the people, passionate about his faith and driven by a desire to make religion accessible to everyone. He soon began to develop an idea that would turn into his most infamous and ambitious undertaking. Not far from his home in Brazil lay the bustling port city of Paranagua, a vital hub for importing and exporting goods. It was a city constantly flowing with truck traffic, as drivers made their way to and from the port on a near daily basis. Over time, Adelir began to notice something about these truckers though. Their lives were spent almost entirely on the road, leaving them with little to no opportunity to practice their faith. This realization sparked a bold idea in him. What if he could build a small chapel at one of the truck stops in Paranagua? A quiet space where drivers could pull over, pray, and reconnect with their spirituality, no matter how far from home they are. The concept was simple and noble, and it quickly gained support from those around him. But there was one major obstacle: money. Construction and maintaining a chapel would be expensive, far more than Adelir could afford on his modest priest salary. The vision, it seemed destined to remain a dream, until he came up with a daring plan to raise funds. Adelir was determined to capture the public's attention, and he had a wildly unconventional plan to do it. He would launch himself into the sky using hundreds of helium-filled balloons, a daring feat known as balloon clustering. Though it sounded outrageous, the stunt had already gained some notoriety thanks to a man named John Nelson, whose own flights had been televised just 2 years earlier in 2006. Inspired by this, Adelir saw it as a perfect opportunity to raise awareness, and more importantly, funds for his trucker chapel. He wanted to break the world record of 19 hours in the air, and he had hoped the media coverage would bring in enough donations to turn his dream into a reality. Well, there was one glaring issue. He had no real experience in aviation. He's a priest. He had gone skydiving numerous times, and I guess from that he believed that was enough to prepare him for what was to lay ahead. On January 13, 2008, in the city of Rampage, Brazil, over 600 helium balloons were filled and tied to a simple chair, which Adelir was then strapped into. With cameras rolling, he ascended rapidly into the sky, rising to a staggering altitude of 17,700 feet and drifting over 17 miles. It was a breathtaking and incredibly risky journey. But after about 4 hours in the air, Adelir safely landed in Argentina. His first flight had been a success and only fueled his ambition. He immediately began preparing for his next record-breaking attempt and was determined to push his limits even further. He even began jungle survival training, took up mountain climbing, and even studied the risk of flying over remote areas, all to ensure he'd be ready if anything went wrong. The next flight, he promised, would make history.
Was equipped with a parachute, a thermal suit, a satellite phone, and a GPS device. He lifted off from the port city of Paranagua on Sunday. The priest's craft also had a buoyant chair. Aspiring to break a 19-hour record for the most hours flying with balloons, Father Carli hoped to raise money to fund a rest stop for truck drivers in Paranagua, a major agricultural port.
To further prepare for his next journey, he equipped himself with a satellite phone and a GPS device, tools he intended to use to track his location and call for help if anything went wrong. With survival training under his belt now, and safety equipment in place, it seemed Adelir was ready for whatever might come his way. But on April 20th, 2008, as a crowd gathered to witness his daring attempt to break the world record, the weather began to shift ominously. Unlike his first flight, which had taken place under clear skies and calm winds, the conditions this time were far from ideal. The sky was overcast, and rain began to fall intermittently, casting doubt over whether the launch could even proceed. But despite the unfavorable weather, Adelir remained undeterred. With unwavering faith, he reassured the crowd, confidently declaring that with God's help, the skies would clear and provide perfect flying conditions. Man, and although some urged him to postpone this flight, he was determined to go ahead. He saw this moment as a crucial opportunity to raise the funds needed to make his project a reality.
In a phone interview with a Brazilian TV channel on Sunday, Father Carli said he was having difficulty operating the GPS and was very cold but fine. He reportedly reached an altitude of 20,000 feet, then descended to about 8,200 feet for his flight to the city of Dourados. He was blown off course by winds. When last contacted, he was floating several miles off the coast. Before losing contact, he said he was losing height and had to land in the sea.
He took off and then vanished into thick rain clouds. Throughout most of the flight, the dense cloud made it nearly impossible to see him, compounded by the fact that he now attached 1,000 balloons instead of 600, lifting him to an even greater height, almost 20,000 feet. Though out of sight, he stayed in contact and soon called a local news station to deliver a somewhat horrifying update. Despite spending countless hours training before the flight, there was one critical thing he hadn't prepared for, and that was how to operate the GPS. He was never taught how it worked, and only realized this when he reached his peak altitude, meaning he was essentially flying blind. His planned course was supposed to carry him 400 miles inland to a city called Dados, and based on his earlier calculations, the wind should have kept him moving in that direction. For a moment, this gave him some comfort, and he trusted his preparation even without knowing the exact coordinates. But as the moon rose, so did his panic. In the distance, he saw something unexpected. The ocean. Somehow the wind had completely reversed, pushing the man into the exact opposite way that he had wanted. And before he could react, he was soaring over open water, powerless to stop or slow down, alone in the pitch black of night. Adelir called his team, urgently requesting a rescue, but he couldn't provide his exact location. By then, he was nearly 40 miles out at sea, just 8 hours into what was supposed to be a 20-hour flight. After sending a desperate message, begging for help, contact with Adelir was lost, and he was never heard from again. The story of the balloon priest, a Catholic priest attempting to break the record for longest flight with helium-filled party balloons. It had captured worldwide attention. The search for Adelir was heavily covered by the media, but after nearly 9 days, the only trace found were his balloons, detached and drifting in the ocean. No sign at all of the priest himself. His fate remained a complete mystery. But then, on July 4th, 2008, a tugboat near an offshore oil rig off the coast of Mikael spotted something floating in the water. Upon closer inspection, it was identified as a body, though only the lower half remained. DNA tests confirmed it was Adelir Antônio de Carli, who likely crashed into the sea, drowned, and then was scavenged by ocean predators, bringing the tragic saga of the balloon priest to a somber end. The end that many had feared would happen from the start.
When he last made contact, pieces of his balloons were also found here. The parish treasurer says she's confident the priest will be found alive. In addition to being an experienced skydiver, she says he also had a floatable seat and a parachute with him. Mike Gracia, The Associated Press.